I become the angry stereotype. You know, I become the rock star, the angry rock star with a hot temper. I think we're both lucky enough that we have, first of all, really great children.
He had the world in his hands, fame, love, and a voice that brought millions to tears. Now, at 62, Seal's life has taken a turn that feels more like a quiet tragedy than a victory lap. What really happened after the stadium lights dimmed? How did one of the most iconic voices of the 90s go from global superstar to living in near isolation? Was it his health, his heartbreak, or something far deeper that no one saw coming? In this video, we uncover the story behind the silence, the part of Seal's life fans never got to see, from broken home to global stage. Before he ever stood beneath the spotlight or filled a stadium with his haunting voice, Seal was just a boy with no place to belong. Long before the charts and the awards, before he became the icon millions admired, he was surviving in silence. His life didn't begin with music. It began with loss, instability, and a longing for safety that followed him long into adulthood. For Seal, childhood wasn't a chapter to remember fondly. It was a wound that never fully closed. Born in London in 1963 to Nigerian and Brazilian parents, Seal entered the world already caught between cultures. His full name, Seal Henry Olusegun Olumide Adeola Samuel, was rich with heritage, but names alone couldn't protect him from what life would deal him. Almost immediately, chaos took hold. His parents, young and struggling, placed him into foster care shortly after his birth. That single decision, meant for survival, left an emotional scar deeper than most would ever understand. For a little while, the Paddington foster home came a little near to something resembling normal. Quiet and structured, it gave young Seal a temporary sense of stability. But even at that time, he still felt a very persistent sense of being other, a quiet awareness that this wasn't home, that he was put there, not chosen. The knowledge hovered over him like a shadow. Seal watched while other kids played. He braced himself while other kids dreamt. It was that loss from early on that colored his view of the world, always waiting for something to be taken away. The dream of normality was shattered when Seal returned to his parents before the age of 4. A homecoming that should have been as sweet as sugar turned bitter as yet another struggle. His mother was unable to reconnect to the son she had once let go while mulling over existing emotional and financial problems. They related through love, but were caught up in pain and guilt. Seal reminisces about it many years later as distant and difficult, two people trying but never touching each other. Then came the father. While mother was all tenderness, father was all severity. Discipline in the household often crossed into darker territory, and Seal has hinted in interviews that fear and emotional strain became daily experiences. Instead of a house that provided comfort, he learned how to survive. Where most kids heard bedtime stories, Seal heard harsh words. Where they felt secure, he felt the weight of uncertainty. It wasn't home, it was something to endure. As he grew up, reality only hardened him. Classmates were off exploring joy and possibility while Seal gazed back, quiet, watchful. Not the loudest kid laughing in the schoolyard, he locked every feeling away but absorbed every moment. It was survival. But that sensitivity, deep well of emotion, eventually becomes his greatest gift. But just when music began to give him a voice, a brutal disease threatened to take it all away. The voice that rose through pain. Before Seal became known for his soul-stirring voice, he had to face a different kind of silence, the kind that comes from pain. At just 21 years old, long before his name ever hit a Billboard chart, Seal's body began turning against him. His skin broke out into angry, inflamed lesions that left deep, permanent scars across his face and scalp. The diagnosis: discoid lupus erythematosus, a rare form of lupus that primarily attacks the skin. This wasn't a temporary condition. It wasn't something he could heal from or hide. It was a life sentence etched across his face in full view of the world. The scars that would later become his signature began as a personal nightmare, one that made him feel deformed, rejected, and painfully exposed in a world obsessed with beauty. Seal, already shadowed by the emotional burden of abandonment and merciless parenting, was caught up in the fight against something that made him feel even more alienated. Children at school would stare. Strangers would ask insensitive questions. Whispers trailed him into every room. The scars became the wall, something people noticed before they had even seen him. It wasn't just on his skin. His identity, self-esteem, and ability to connect were all scarred as well. For the young man who was trying to find himself, lupus didn't just complicate life. It shattered portions of it. The condition came with flares that were unexpected, fatigue that was brutal, and pain that would linger. They would heal on the outside, but the interior was damaged. And still, in spite of it all, Seal refused to collapse. He turned inside, latching on to the one thing that made him feel strong: his voice. Music became not only an outlet, but also a strategy for survival. He once said that music was the only place he could really be unapologetically himself. His voice was raw, layered with emotion, ache, and power, and people could see it. There was nothing polished about Seal's singing. It was real. It was pain turned to poetry. That voice, scarred just like the man behind it, became his weapon and refuge. However, even after all this, the climb was difficult, as it turned out. He was not an instant signing. There was no blast-off pitch into showbiz overnight. He put in the hard work, played in tiny clubs, lost sleep, slept in catacombs, agonized on tour in Asia with a funk band, and sang back with small-time bands. Those life experiences were not just resumed builders, but more like the kind of grizzly bear and cattle beatings that hardened a body, both mentally and emotionally. And as his career exploded into international stardom, Seal found something even more powerful than fame. He found love. The fairy tale with Heidi Klum. Just when it seemed like Seal had found steady footing, when his music was soaring and his pain had found a voice, life handed him something he never dared to believe he could have: a love that felt unconditional. For a man who had been through years of abandonment, rejection, and illness, what came next felt almost surreal. Her name was Heidi Klum, a global supermodel, television personality, and a woman whose presence would change Seal's life forever. They met in the early 2000s in the lobby of a New York City hotel. Heidi was already a star, and Seal was at the height of his career. It could have been a fleeting celebrity encounter, but there was something different about this meeting. There are stories, whispers really, that Seal was instantly struck by her presence, while Heidi later admitted that he swept her off her feet in a way no one else had. Within just 5 weeks, they were on their first official date. When Heidi found herself expecting Lenny from a previous relationship, it was a time when most men in Seal's position, incessant, famous, thriving, might easily have walked away from. But Seal didn't just stay. He stepped in. He treated Lenny like his own child from the very beginning, standing by Heidi's side throughout her pregnancy and becoming the kind of steady presence he had always longed for as a child. For Heidi, he was not just a partner, but a spouse, a father protector, a co-parent, a soulmate. And for Seal, Heidi was not just love. She was the ultimate stability in life. She was the family he had spent his whole life dreaming about, but never quite finding. Years later, Seal would say, "I had total clarity in a relationship for the first time in my life. I know exactly what I had to do." Seal and Heidi then married in May 2005 with a beautiful beach ceremony in Mexico. It was private, personal, and emotional, nothing less than what they wished for. And with that moment, the life of Seal turned an exciting bend that he had been trying to take for decades. From the once lonely boy in Paddington, now a husband, father, and a focal figure in a loving home, he legally adopted Lenny, giving her his last name, and together with Heidi, they brought 3 more children, Henry, Johann, and Lou. Their home was loud, vibrant, energetic, and, for Seal, heavenly. And after a childhood bouncing back and forth between homes, a life lived in fear and uncertainty, that chaos was comforting. It was his. It was love. Not even their love was hidden. The couple might have been one of the most admired celebrity couples in the 2000s. Every year, they would renew their vows in elaborate ceremonies, time inviting friends and the other time keeping it between them and their kids. So it goes this way. It turned into a tradition, a living promise. It is something we enjoy, as they said during that time, something the children have gotten used to. It's like, hey, Mom and Dad love each other, and they get married every year. They were that couple. The couple that made people believe in fairy tales once again. They were the ones who had everything: beauty, fame, talent, and a love that seemed bulletproof. But the truth is, even the strongest love stories can hide the deepest cracks. Behind those pictures, something was being untidily unraveled. Fans were shell-shocked when it happened in 2012. Seal and Heidi suddenly announced their separation. There was no nasty side to this, no cheating scandals, no screaming matches, just a quiet, mutual decision to part ways. The official joint statement read as follows: "We were married for 7 very loving, loyal, and happy years, but we have grown apart." The outside world could not understand those ends. How could a couple so into one another, who renewed their wedding vows so regularly, afford to end it all so quietly? But to Seal, the breakup was more than just a romantic loss. It was the fall of a dream he had fought his entire life to build. There was civility in the interviews. Rarely did he blame and criticize Heidi, but the unshed tears behind his words could not go unnoticed. The man had, at long last, set up a stable home. The man who had finally put down his guard had to face this kind of heartbreak, which ordinary people undergo, at a maximum, once. For Seal, it was not just a heartbreak, but an emotional return to that emptiness of his youth. A searing reminder that love, suddenly taken away, was so very real. Heidi later claimed that, like all couples, they had their ups and downs. But, to protect their children, she steadfastly refused to reveal details of their conflicts. People don't need to know who did what. Our children don't need to see the lows printed in magazines. The divorce didn't just break a relationship. It reopened childhood wounds that Seal thought he had left behind. A soul torn by health and heartache. Even at the height of his career, when the world saw Seal as a powerhouse performer with a voice that could silence a stadium, there were battles raging beneath the surface. Battles the audience never heard, but ones he fought daily. Physical pain, emotional grief, and mental strain weren't new to Seal. But after his divorce from Heidi Klum, the weight of all 3 seemed to come crashing down on him at once. Seal had always lived with lupus, the chronic autoimmune disease that caused the deep scars on his face. But what most people didn't know was that the disease never stopped there. It wasn't just about appearance. It was about a body that betrayed him in ways that no camera could capture. Fatigue haunted him. Joint pain came without warning. Some mornings, even standing up took everything he had. For a man who had spent his life giving everything on stage, his illness now demanded a toll he could no longer ignore. And lupus wasn't his only invisible enemy. At about the same time, Seal began suffering silently from extreme anxiety and panic attacks. One of the most terrifying episodes occurred when he was recording in what was supposed to be his sanctuary, his escape from the pressure of life. A big panic attack hit him. His chest tightened, his heart racing, and suddenly he felt as if he was dying. Paramedics took him to the emergency room, and for a moment, Seal thought his life was over. But the diagnosis was no heart problem. It was anxiety. something Seal had not bargained for in a performer in whom pressure was expected to be a part of life. But this, however, felt different. This felt like a terror from deep inside. No warning, no clear reason. Panic crept in during the moments of silence. When music ended, the crowd had gone away, and there was silence, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He was soon open about the experience when he said, "It's given me such an understanding and empathy when people can't find help," and he urged others not to endure in silence. There is no shame. There is no guilt in asking for help, whether therapy or a friend. It needs to be shared. Words like these, coming from someone who was once a bastion of strength, weighed even heavier. Seal wasn't just fighting an illness. After all, Seal was suffering from many other elements of loss. The death of his marriage did not just cost him his heart. It was an entire personality disintegration. Having enjoyed a childhood spent in foster care under his own nebulous family, he had finally built up the home of his dreams. And now it was out. The love, all the rights, and togetherness are smashed to pieces. The daily family dinners and annual renewing of vows disappeared, and he was left with a quiet home and an uncertain future. This type of emotional whiplash makes just as deep a scar as a physical one. But instead of falling apart publicly, Seal did something unexpected. He disappeared almost entirely. The vanishing act. There was a time when Seal's name meant thunderous applause, standing ovations, and global recognition. His voice was everywhere. From stadium speakers to wedding playlists, from movie soundtracks to late-night television. He wasn't just a singer, he was a phenomenon. And then, almost without warning, he disappeared. After the release of his 2017 album Standards, a collection of classic covers paying homage to the music that shaped him, something changed. He didn't follow it up with a tour blitz or another wave of original hits. He didn't do press marathons or flood social media with teasers and promos. In fact, he barely promoted the album at all. Some fans chalked it up to a creative choice. Others speculated that Seal had lost the fire that once drove him. But those who looked closer began to notice something else. Seal wasn't just stepping back from music. He was stepping away from fame itself. Even with current artists thriving on constant exposure, Seal became the antithesis of viral. While new pop stars were emerging through TikTok, streaming metrics, and superb branding, Seal endorsed the opposite of obscurity. No interviews, few public appearances, almost no presence on social media. The imitation of corporate spokespeople in glamour. No Twitter rants, no Instagram feeds, no grand-selling comebacks. The dullness of silence around someone who once had the world at his feet makes this assumption very challenging. Some inside sources hinted that perhaps the artist felt too much at odds with the shifting landscape of the industry. Music is now less about emotions and more about algorithms. Success has less to do with impact and more to do with likes. For Seal, an artist underlined by pain and authenticity, this empty space seemed worth nothing. He simply let the spotlight move on without him instead of embarking on a chase. Other perspectives would argue that discomfort with the industry might have only been the tip of the iceberg. Some speculate that his retreat was a question of self-preservation. After the emotional trauma of divorce, if he was to extort more of himself in performance, not to mention physically from the draining effects of lupus, Seal may have found silence a means of survival. Putting his heart on the line in performance time and again became unsustainable for him. It wasn't being bitter, it was being exhausted. But he wouldn't disappear entirely. A couple of rare outings, some music performances, one or two television cameos, yet subdued, restrained, and low pressure. Gone were the protracted tours, the high-pressure record release schedules, and press tours. Seal was in favor of a planned avoidance of celebrity. And still, the world never fully turned its gaze away. Whenever he showed up, here and there was a glimmer of hope for his fans. Is Seal coming back? Is a comeback on? They asked. But Seal never said a thing. He just moved at his own speed. No announcements, no statements, just moments. Completely silent. Underneath this calm facade, however, were turbulent tides of emotions. Fame was an elevator that put him up and water that just kept isolating him. In the same breath, he would say that what fans afforded him was the love that he never got from his parents. Yet that love comes with its own baggage. When it waned, when the cheering crowds passed him by, the hollow feeling returned. And this time around, there was no immediate exit in the form of a stage. Few truly comprehend the price that certain stars pay, transitioning from a globally recognized personality to being a virtually unknown one, not by virtue of failure, but by a conscious decision to withdraw, requires a strength that many do not recognize. Heartbreak of another sort, the one that makes no news yet gnaws at your identity like a gentle parasite. Yet even in the silence, Seal never stopped being a father, and it became the one role he refused to let go of. Father first, everything else second. When the crowds stopped screaming and the cameras stopped flashing, Seal didn't chase the spotlight. Instead, he turned towards something far more grounding: his children. In the wake of heartbreak, health struggles, and the collapse of the family life he'd once worked so hard to build, Seal found a new purpose in fatherhood, and from that point on, it became clear. Being a dad wasn't just something he did, it was who he became. After his high-profile separation from Heidi Klum, Seal didn't launch into a new romance or try to repair his image. He didn't distract himself with career moves or dive into controversy. Instead, he stayed close to the only thing that still made sense: his kids. He and Heidi shared custody of their 4 children: Lainey, whom Seal had adopted and given his name, and their 3 biological children, Henry, Johan, and Lou. Seal wasn't that dad's celebrity father. You are not going to find him at any award night holding hands with his kids for a camera show or dishing out sound bites from some rehearsed script about how to be a parent. Present in the real sense, he may have had birthdays, school events, soccer matches, and those long, quiet afternoons that never made it to the tabloids. Seal knew just what he wanted to ensure his kids had, as someone else who had grown up without a stable family: consistency, love, and a version of safety he never got to have. Colocatory, especially in the glare of fame, is never easy. Tension is said to lie behind the signs between Seal and Heidi. Reports circulated about disagreements over custody schedules, travel arrangements, and even the public exposure of their children. And while Heidi went on and married German musician Tom Kaulitz, Seal remained silent for the whole time about his private life. He didn't criticize. He didn't explain. He just kept coming. For the kids. Reportedly, he was dating his former personal assistant, Laura Strayer, in 2021. Unlike Rose, this relationship was largely kept under wraps. There were no red carpets, no interviews. In fact, not even one mention on social media, just a quiet companionship, which hinted perhaps at the fact that Seal had finally found someone who could understand his need for clutter-free privacy and stability. Meanwhile, as the world speculated why Seal was off stage, Seal was performing a different kind of act free of the stage lights, microphones, and arenas. It was indeed parenthood that gave him an anchor, wherein he had found some slivers of peace amidst the chaos he had endured. His children are now all in their early 20s and have always had lovely things to say about their father, even during the period when Seal's fame faded. However, his love for them has remained unwavering. He once said that his greatest role wasn't on stage or in the studio. It was being a dad, and he lived up to it. Unlike many public figures, Seal did not use his children for his own publicity. Instead, he protected their privacy and helped guide them through an often harsh world. But memories do not always feel that way. Christmases, different ways of raising their children, and the dynamics that came with changing family shapes had their own burden attached to them. Perhaps some moments would have weighed heavily on Seal. Family lunches that would never be again. milestone events that would split his children's lives into before and after, traditions that once gave shape to his sense of belonging. But this was even more true with Seal when his kids grew older and more independent. Like most things, his life would have to adjust for this. As parents become older with children, many things are quite subtle. The sounds that go away from homes often give way to those things people don't actually share. A kind of distant loneliness. For a man who had lost so much already, this silence could cut deeper than applause ever healed. Quietly, steadily, and in that peculiar grace most would not expect from someone whose life once revolved around the spotlight, he continued. He never went after the headlines. He chased the kind of moments that do not go viral but count the most. Even the love of his children, as great and even grounding as it might have been, could not save Seal from the reality of time, aging, and fading fame. No matter how devoted he remained, the world he once ruled had simply moved on. The thing that came next was something even more painful than heartbreak: irrelevance. But even the love of his children couldn't shield him from what was coming next. A new chapter, filled with loneliness and fading light. A life quieter than anyone expected. There's a kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It doesn't soothe or offer calm. It echoes. And for Seal, that's the silence many believe he now lives in. At 62, the man who once commanded stages, topped global charts, and poured his soul into songs that became timeless anthems, now walks through life far from the roar of applause. Some might call it peace. Others would say it looks like a slow drift into sadness. After decades of giving the world everything, his voice, his pain, his story, Seal has largely vanished from the places where stars go to shine. No more massive tours, no weekly television spots, no splashy interviews. His public life has been reduced to rare sightings, brief collaborations, and the occasional intimate performance that feels more like a whisper than a declaration. After Standards, a wistful, serene compilation of everlasting classics, released in 2017, Seal didn't run after any more phenomena because he was on the scene then. He didn't set out to remake himself in the world of modern pop. Obsessed with TikTok and the charts, he chose not to engage in the game of fame anymore, but walked away from it all. The noise and the possibly. The very thing that once made him feel loved. It is not just a change of pace in a career, it's a change of presence. The same artist who once filled stadiums now prefers privacy over performance, quiet over crowds. He rarely attends events and has a nearly non-existent online presence. There are no dramatic reinventions, no high-profile pleas for relevance, just silence. But what does that silence mean anyway? Some reckon Seal simply matured into a man who regarded peace more desirable than popularity. A realization of years gone by in fighting emotional and physical battles before reaching stillness. But others are convinced this quiet is not peace, but isolation. After many years of overly giving and not receiving much in return, as if it were a man who built a life around love and music, now deprived of both, with surrounding memories much louder than the present. His health, already impaired because of many years of fighting lupus, calls for further demands from him with the advance of age. The fatigue, the joint pains, the flare-ups, they have intensified as well. Long tours aren't an option. Even a short performance requires an energy reserve that just doesn't exist for him anymore. And when your whole life has been about performing, what happens when the body can no longer keep up with passion? Perhaps the worst heartbreak of all is what Seal has shared to date about his inner world. Anxiety still haunts him. The panic attacks never completely retired. The same man who stood before thousands unshaken has quite often felt the most afraid alone. He has talked about how hard it is to cope in a visibility-developing world when your soul begs to hide. Fame is the most beguiling of all illusions. It gave Seal much in the form of love, affection, and a sense of belonging, which his childhood failed to provide. But fame is fickle. It loves in torrents and exits quietly. Seal was a household name. Now, he has become an unseen figure on the streets to a new generation. For a man who thought of applause as love, this dimming spotlight could feel like total rejection once again. His love life, too, remains an enigma. His romance with former assistant Laura Strayer aside, there have been no splashy romances, huge public declarations, no fairy tale endings, some quiet companionship or perhaps a discreet sense of loneliness. His children grow older and start their lives. While fatherhood remains an anchoring force, that too is fading into quieter times. Seal does not appear bitter, but rather haunted by what once was and possibly what could have been. The world that once drank from the flowing cup of his talent now hardly notices his silence. In that silence, though, is the man who wrote Kiss from a Rose, who loved deeply, who survived unthinkable pain and persists, whether anyone is looking or not. Seal's story isn't just about fame or music. It's about survival, heartbreak, and the price of being different in a world that only sees the surface. What do you think? Should Seal return to the spotlight? Or is his quiet life the peace he always needed? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and watch our next video for more stories that reveal the truth behind the fame.